Of Talking MotoGP with myself, Rob Portman, and Paul Scott. We're going to dive into everything from the latest MotoGP round at Aragon in Spain. And the winner for the earliest tune-in this time is not Yvonne Pretorius. She came in at 7:47 p.m. SA time. Dean Lemon came in at 7 minutes past 7, saying, "Hi, everyone, early enough." So, Yvonne, you have been beaten. You have been pipped to the number one spot there for the earliest person in here. Although Yvonne does go on and say, "Woohoo, Carl, what can Toprak do in MotoGP next year?" So exciting. That's one of the many topics that we're going to talk about. Paul, first of all, maybe shouldn't have bought you a cap at Silverstone. I should have bought you a beanie.
Rob, well, just as you say that, and we chatted for a brief minute before we came on air. Good evening to everyone who's tuned in. I hope you enjoy the show. Rob, yeah, the roles have reversed. About a month ago, I said to you, "Why are you wearing a jacket?" I'm in a T-shirt. Well, the weather here in Joburg, and I'm presuming the whole of South Africa, but specifically here in Joburg, yeah, man, it's 2 degrees if you know, the real feel. It's really cold. Winter's hit us, but you know what it's like. By next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll be back, hopefully in the high teens, early 20s. But yeah, the weather's cold, but certainly MotoGP at the moment is hot.
Yeah, I have no sympathy for you when it comes to weather or anyone in South Africa, to be honest. Dave McBain, hi, Robert Paul, looking forward to tonight's chat. Paolo Cerchetti, hi there, everyone looking forward to this tonight. David Callahan, Wayne Taylor, Chris D, Dick Crosby, Jacques Claessens, Jane Thompson, CP Boertz, Jean Creel, Nicole Briet, Warwick Evans, evening, Rob and Paul, and everyone. What's going on with Brad? But a better race in all for KTM. Warwick, yeah, we've got a lot. Paul, I literally just ate my dinner 20 minutes ago, because normally I don't eat. I'm like rushed around and I don't eat, then I get starving. And last 10 minutes of the show, I probably don't even know if I make any sense, but I've eaten now. I've made myself comfortable because we have got a lot to talk about. Wade Williams, Brett Lawson, Sean and Ronnie Good, Daryl Holmes, Ashley Belden, Ashraf Gajar, Gary Granger, Grant Gibson, Mark van der Berg, Jason Harrington, Rian Petit, Antonio Velmelo, Oliveira out, ? That's what we're going to talk about tonight. Dux Lexo, Umbunyana, Mike Teal, good evening, Rob and Paul. Greetings from myself and grandson Leon Townsend. What a heartbreaking weekend for our boys, but they will bounce back, I'm sure. And then everyone else that tuned in, thank you so much. Get yourselves nice and relaxed. We do have a lot to talk about. I'm going to start there, Paul, with our South African riders in the other classes, in the supporting categories, be it Moto 3 and Moto 2. We'll start with Riche in Moto 3. Coming back at Silverstone with the injury, we knew it was going to be hard. First time at Silverstone, did a great job there with the long lap penalties, just did what he could there. Moved on to Aragon, a circuit that he's familiar with. Straight away in the free practice sessions, we could see he was comfortable, still suffering with that injury. I think that maybe hindered him a little bit. But again, the maturity, the experience coming through there now for Riche Mudley. Didn't go out there and crash himself into the walls and into the gravel. It must have been hard for him because he probably knew he had more pace and knew he had more to challenge. But with the injury and coming from Silverstone with the confidence and everything, brought it home in the point scoring positions again.
Yeah, Rob, absolutely. And I was so delighted to see that. I think at one stage he was 22nd, 21st. And a couple of guys crashed in front of him, but he kept dropping or going up the leaderboard, which is what we want to see. And I think he did a fantastic job. Unfortunately, because he was out of that top sort of 8, we didn't see too much of him on TV. But watching the leaderboard on the left of the TV screen, he did exactly what I would have said if I was his team manager. I would have said, Riche, you're coming back from an injury. All you need to do is finish as well as you can and take as little risk as possible, because there's no point in falling again, possibly re-injuring the broken arm stroke wrist, and then sitting out for another 2 races. Okay, there's one race, then the summer break. So I think he did exactly the right thing, and he's showing a level of maturity for a rider with his experience. The team must be delighted with him.
Tim Jordan, hi from Tim J and Ali Jordan in Yorkshire, having their mushy peas as they watch the show, I'm pretty sure. Thank you so much for joining us. My dad's from Barnsley, so Yorkshire is like second home. Got so many family members there. So thank you so much for tuning in. Lawrence Jones also joining. Yeah, Paul, exactly what you just said about Riche. I think he's doing a fantastic job and really keen to see this evolution of Riche as he gets better and faster and he climbs his way through the ranks in MotoGP and Moto2 and everything. I think he's got a bright future coming ahead of him. No doubt about that. Talking about Moto3 again, the racing was epic in Moto3, Moto2 and MotoGP. almost not back-to-back weekends, but 2 rounds in a row where the racing really has been good in all the categories. Moto2, moving to Moto2 now quickly, we'll touch upon Darren Binder, but that really is becoming such an exciting class. For a couple of years now, I don't want to say it was stalemate. It was always had glimpses of good racing, but it was never, wasn't that disappointed if I missed Moto2. Oh, well, if I missed Moto2, it's not the end of the world. I can watch it later. Now I'm like, listen, Lighty, finish your football. I need to get home now and watch Moto2, and this is becoming even more of a problem for the likes of Darren. I watched Darren this weekend coming back from a massive injury from Le Mans, nowhere near 100% fit. Confidence is at an all-time low. Missed the last race, meaning had long lap penalty to serve in the race. All this compounding on top of him, all at the same time coming into the most competitive Moto2 class probably ever. And I looked at it. Manuel Gonzalez, as dominant as he is, qualifies where he did because he crashed out. I think it was 18th or whatever he qualified, and he came through the field to 7th or something. And that just shows you how good Moto2 is, because normally a Pedro Acosta or someone could just make their way through if the field wasn't that. Gonzalez is on it at the moment. He proved it in the MotoGP test, how good a rider. We'll touch upon that later. But that Moto2 field has just got depth now. It really runs deep. And this is the biggest challenge for Darren Binder now, is to try and stand out in that Moto2 field. If I look at Sergio Garcia, who in the last couple of days, it looks like it's going to be announced that he's being split from his MSI team, being booted out of there because just not performing. That guy 8 months ago was touted as a MotoGP rider to go to MotoGP, was winning in Moto2, leading the Moto2 World Championship, and it's just plummeted. You look at, the likes of Jake Dixon, up and down, turbulent. Dennis Foggia went to Moto2. He's gone back. Jabal Masia, you look at the names that have come into that Moto2 and been kicked out. It really is not an easy championship to be in. And this is all compounding on Darren. And as I said, I watched Darren, and there was that one, scene where Darren kind of, not on purpose, got in the way of Celestino Vietti in the qualifying. But every time there were those glimpses of Darren on screen, just didn't look comfortable, didn't look happy. Bike problems in the main race forced him out, and it's not a pretty exercise. Let's just put it that way for Darren at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. And we spoke about it 2 shows ago about the pressure. We even kind of said our theme should have been pressure. So it goes back to this whole thing, and I'm use Jorge Martin as the example, where MotoGP have now changed the ruling, specifically pushed by Aprilia. A rider who's been injured, okay, MotoGP slightly different scenario because of the power of the bikes and the different weight, to let that rider test before he gets back on a bike if he's missed so many races. I think it's 3 consecutive races. Now, going back to Darren, he missed 1 race. He now comes back. He knows he's not at full fitness, but he passes the medical, and I don't know what that entails. I presume they look at what your injury was, and you've got to do something, push-ups, pull-ups, whatever it is related to that injury. Now, they can grin and bear it. Marc Marquez did it 1 week after fracturing his humerus. So they can do that immediately. Whatever it takes, they make sure they're on the grid. But to their own detriment, and I fully understand, all they want to do is be on the grid and racing. If you've got to drag the guy there, and we've seen it, Rins was the example, on crutches, helping him, Lorenzo years ago, getting the guy on and off the bike with assistance because he can't do it by himself. But he's passed the medical. Now, going back to Darren, he's got to prove himself. He knows that. The pressure is just mounting. So now he's riding. He's not at full fitness, and he's got to perform. I think it becomes it's a double-edged sword, but it can have serious consequences if he has another big off because he's chasing a result. There is no solution to this. It's motorcycle racing. There's certainly an element of danger and risk, but it goes to, do they need to relook at when a rider suffered a fracture, whatever it is, maybe a compulsory 4 weeks off the bike? Because they're all trying to just skip 1 race and then back on the bike, which isn't a 4-week period from when they've had the surgery, if that was required. I don't know, Robin. I'm not one saying, no, Darren shouldn't be on the bike. I'm just saying this is how it compounds the problem. And then, if he does have another big crash, he doesn't want to say that he's injured. He wants to get on the bike and ride. That's their mentality. So, yes, it's such a difficult one. And it's not just Darren. This has been going on with MotoGP racing, I'm going to say, since it started. But people who are watching and saying, "Oh, come on, Darren, this guy's got so much going on and he's not at 100%." It's just pressure, man.
Yeah, Wayne Taylor asked a question here. Rob, would Darren consider maybe the World Supersport paddock, maybe a complete rebuild and reset for him? Wayne, I really wanted to work out in the MotoGP Championship because I think we've seen what Darren has to offer. I think he's just been pummeled into the ground with confidence issues. I just think, with everything that's happened, we've spoken about it before, the injury, not performing, I think, any person would take it. Marquez took it when the results weren't there and he was crashing, and the injury. You do have to eventually take that step back. Marquez is an 8-time world champion. I know it's a different, you can't, got to compare apples with apples. If I just look at the Aldeguer exercise where he went to World Supersport, rebuilt his career, now he's re-signed with Ducati World Superbike. Looks like he's going to win the World Superbike Championship. Ducati test rider in 2026 to help him develop for 2027. There's his route back into MotoGP. I think Darren and his personality would fit beautifully into that World Superbike paddock. I think it's slightly less travel, it's slightly less media and all those things. And Darren's, nature would fit in better there. And I want to see Darren succeed in Moto2. I know he can. The odds are just stacking up against him. As I said, time waits for no man in that Moto2 World Championship anymore. Darren's had, last year, as diehard fans, the team, it's the team. The year before, the team. That team is now leading the World Championship. Winning races with Senna, Aegis, and still on WP suspension. They've got it right now. Darren's with Cressini, where Manuel Gonzalez was last year winning, and Albert Arenas has glimpses. So it's got to the point where, unfortunately, the fingers are now all being pointed at Darren, and he'll know that better than anyone. So I want him to make it work out in there. But Wayne, I would hate to see Darren just end his exercise of, well, if I'm not in the Moto2 or MotoGP, I'm out. I would like to see him. And I think he needs that reset in many ways. But first option is to stay in Moto2 and get some we've spoken about it before, consistency, momentum, 3 or 4 rounds of really good results, no crashes, no injuries, no Darren's taken this rider out or nothing, just 4 rounds of going under the radar, getting top 10s, and then just sparking that resurgence. That's what we need from Darren Binder.
Rob, going to your Aldeguer example, even if Aldeguer doesn't make it back into MotoGP, which is highly unlikely, he's had a successful career. He's a Supersport world champion. Odds on he could be World Superbike world champion. If he had to retire now, to me, he's had a more successful career than Andre Iannone. Because you look at the results. So for Darren to take that step, and in no ways are we suggesting that that's what he should do or that's what's going to happen, but possibly if a good ride, that opportunity arises, it might be something worth considering.
Absolutely. Staying in the World Superbike paddock, the big breaking news literally a couple of hours ago before we came on, Toprak Razgatlioglu. We don't have to talk about it anymore. We don't have to speculate or spend hours talking about it. Toprak Razgatlioglu will be a MotoGP rider in 2026. He has signed the contract with Pramac Yamaha. Paul, I, for one, I've seen a lot of mixed reactions on social media. A lot of people, yes, brilliant, positive. And then a lot of people just saying, he's not going to cut it. A couple of people on the fence saying this is going to be the true test, which, of course, in many ways it is. From my perspective, I've always kind of said I'm really excited. I think Toprak's got that's something. He made Yamaha better in World Superbikes. He made BMW. If I just look at BMW now, there's 2 of them out on the grid. Van der Mark, forgets there. Toprak still competes and wins races and competes against Ducati on a BMW that in anyone else's hands will not be up there. He did the same thing on Yamaha. In many ways, he did the same thing in his last couple of races or his last year on a Kawasaki. He's got that certain something. I'm not saying he's going to climb into MotoGP and destroy everyone. MotoGP is a beast. It's an animal that no one can go in there and tame. But I do think he'll climb in there and he'll bring some added value. And as Alex van der Berg says here, super exciting news. And as Dirk Kotzer says here as well, can't wait, Toprak. So exciting times.
It most certainly is, and as you say, it's a hour and a half, 2 hours old. The news, it's fantastic news for the motorcycle industry, the racing industry. It brings another dimension to MotoGP. So the anti-Marc Marquezes possibly have someone else to shout for now. My question, I think he's certainly going to be a benefit to Yamaha, without a doubt. But I think he's going to get exposed at the same time because he's not jumping on the best bike. So at the moment, he's not getting on a Ducati. However, what is his benchmark going to be? I think it's going to be possibly Alex Rins. He's not going to worry about Quartararo. Quartararo on the Yamaha is very special. It'll be hard for him to match Quartararo's results. So I think that he's really going to have a look at Rins as his benchmark. Who's going to lose the seat? You know me. I've always said Miller and Oliveira, I don't believe they've earned the right to be there anymore. But my honest opinion, I hope Jack is retained. He has done everything to retain his seat for next year. But he's the one without a contract. And Oliveira's got a contract. How they shuffle that, what happens, I don't know. But I tell you what, it's going to be very good for Yamaha. They're going to have someone who's enthusiastic, who wants to show what he can do. He's got to prove a point. There's no doubt about that. So, yeah, I think it's a win for MotoGP.
It is. And as Sven Grin says, yeah, you've got to give him time. We can't let the hype get the best of us. And I agree with that. When we were talking about that Honda deal where it was potentially going to Honda World Superbikes for 26 and then, come in 27 when it's Pirelli and the new kind of a fresh start, a blank piece of paper into MotoGP. I like that idea. But then also hearing Neil Hodgson and the guys talking about it over the weekend, Toprak's mindset is very much to come in the championship now to experience the 1000cc edition of MotoGP. And the Michelin tires, that era, because he might not ever experience that era again, but also to learn the tracks. And that's another big thing. A lot of these tracks, something like 60% of them or 50% something, are not on the World Superbike calendar. The World Superbike calendar is very condensed. There's one away race in Phillip Island. The rest is a couple of European tracks, Cremona, all these tracks that MotoGP doesn't go to. So it's getting himself familiar with tracks so that by the time 2027 comes, it's not a case of, right, now I've got to learn tracks while understanding MotoGP. Now you'll have the full advantage of understanding the Pirelli tires and everything, but also knowing the tracks. So it's very much going to be a bed-in year for him. As you said, set realistic targets. Alex Rins is a big question mark. If he's going to stay there, as you said, whose place is he going to take? At this point in time, it looks like Miguel Oliveira from what we're hearing. Miller's on the 1-year contract, but it looks like they're going to retain him. Oliveira is on a 2-year contract, but that's going to be bought out or torn up, and he could possibly, his only route, I think, would probably be World Superbikes. But one thing that happened at the test as well yesterday, Paul, is for all MotoGP teams to consider, with Manu Gonzalez climbing on that Aprilia, and after however many laps, ending that test, the fastest ever Aragon test ever, 2-point-something seconds off straight away. The MotoGP teams have got good options now. So the likes of Oliveira, Rins, they almost become dispensable now because it's like, okay, well, thank you for your service. There's your badge, your medal. But the likes of, Gonzalez, Senna Aegis, David Alonso, there's so many talented riders coming through that you can't waste these seats. I don't want to say waste these seats because, these guys have earned their right to be there. But there's too much talent that's coming through now. So, yeah, the big question for Yamaha is, I think they're playing their cards right. I think the Toprak move is brilliant. As you said, freshen things up a little bit. It was either now or never for Toprak to get to MotoGP, so I'm glad he's making the jump. I always love the exercise of a World Superbike rider going to MotoGP. I used to love it in the past when Bayliss won Superbikes. You knew he was going MotoGP. Colin Edwards, you knew. Neil Hodgson, Ruben Zaus. Not all of them performed, I know that, but I loved that exercise. We haven't seen it play out since Ben Spies. It's been a really long time. So I'm excited for the move to happen, and it's now a case of Yamaha having to juggle to see, right, what do we do? Manu Gonzalez is a really good option. Do we tear up the Alex Rins contract and cost ourselves $1 million and take a youngster on board? Aldeguer could become available. There's so many factors there for Yamaha and Honda and everyone else now to consider, because it's not as clear-cut as take the experienced rider. They know the Michelin tires and that. We got 2027 coming. Experience can maybe just get out the window now. We need fresh, new, young, vibrant to get us ready for 27.
100%, Robin. I've been saying that for a while. Not every team needs 2 rookies in their team. I fully understand that. But we've had teams where they could have put a rookie in, a guy like Aldeguer, like Fermin Aldeguer, who come in with no expectations and no experience. And now we're getting Toprak, Manu Gonzalez. He just showed that, first of all, 2 things. One, he showed his talent, which has not been under any doubt this season. He's certainly upped his game. But he's also shown that the modern MotoGP bike is, and I use inverted commas, it's quite easy to get along with, up to a point. And straight away he adapted, and just shows how these chaps, their mental ability to go from a bike that runs top speed, what's a Moto2 bike, 280, maybe 290, to a bike that's running 340 k's an hour. Your mind, everything is happening faster. I remember when Brad first jumped on the MotoGP bike, he said, the time between corners is gone. On the Moto2 bike, you could actually kind of disengage for a second or two. He said, the MotoGP bike, between corners, the time is gone. Everything happens. Now, Gonzalez climbs on the bike and straight away he's there. Yes, he's 2 and a bit seconds off the pace, but that's his first time. What did he do? 49 laps, I think it was. That's fantastic. So, yeah, certainly I think it's a couple of the oldies have to either really up their game, but like you said, it's time to, move in the new blood, and you're not moving everyone out of a team. You're moving the guys they've had their time. I mean, how long's Jack been in MotoGP? 11 seasons. Oliveira must be very similar. Marini, yeah, he's on the fence. Ralph Fernandez must be on the fence too. But I think it's time. Let's, and that's what improves the sport, is when you let the new blood come through. Happens with every sport. So certainly going to happen. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, not only the Manu Gonzalez exercise, but Fermin Aldeguer, as someone also pointed out. Yeah, a lot of us. Well, I mean, I didn't really have any kind of expectations of him. I didn't think he would be kind of flying the way that he is, and sticking it to the light, getting his elbows out with the Morbidellis and that. Pedro Acosta, Ayagura in a couple of these races that he's done. So again, there's a lot more for these teams to now think and go, thank you, Alex Rins, but you are walking wounded. Miguel Oliveira, thank you, but you're walking wounded. You got to take all those things. We're paying you a lot of money, and we need results now. Andy Jamison makes a very good point here, coming from that crew chief side that Andy Jamison comes from, a South African who's worked in the BSB paddock now for many years. Rob, I think what will make or break Toprak's transition will be whether or not Yamaha let Phil Marin come with him. Now, Phil Marin's his crew chief at BMW, was at Yamaha as well. They've built this connection. Phil Marin knows what Toprak wants. And we spoke about this, I think, in the last show or the show before, Paul, where I said, in many ways that Brad and his team maybe need to look at potentially freshening things up, because Vinales has come in with a crew chief that he's worked with before at Suzuki and Aprilia and everything, and jumped straight into KTM and made it work. That connection sometimes is more valuable than anything else. And maybe, there hasn't been that kind of connection or something. But carrying on with Andy's thought process, I couldn't agree with him more. Not because they work well together, but because MotoGP teams are much less flexible than Superbike ones. In the Grand Prix Championship, riders are groomed to be extremely disciplined, extremely focused, and do what they are told. I'm not sure that regimen will work for Toprak. It didn't for his mentor Kenan, just my take from my experience in the GP in Spain. And he's absolutely right here. And that's why in many ways, I'm saying that the Darren Binder exercise will work better in the World Superbike paddock. It's a little, less suit and tie and scripted and this and this and this. I saw it with Darren. I saw it firsthand with Darren in that RNF Yamaha team. Darren would come in and say this and this and this. Guy would make his notes, hand it over to the Japanese guy behind the computer, and that note sat there and went, okay, that's cute, but the bike's telling us this and this and this. Shut up, we've done something, you go ride the bike now, and that's what it is. And Toprak's coming in, telling Phil Marin this from his feel, and that, and Phil's making the change, and BMW are giving him that freedom to make the change because they need it. He's going to come into this Yamaha environment where they're going to go, listen, thank you very much, but we've got this data on Michelin tires and at these tracks and on our bike, and with Fabio, this is what works. And that, so how much freedom is Toprak going to have there? Not only Phil doesn't come with him, but if he goes there and he gets a Spanish or Italian or Japanese tech guy with him, and he's saying this, this, and this, and they go, that's very cute. But listen, you shut up and ride the bike. You break late and do your thing. We'll set the bike up. So again, it's easy to say Toprak's going to come in, with his talent and everything. We have seen it in the past, exactly like what Kenan Sofoglu dominated World Supersport. I thought was going to come into Moto2 and walk the floor with everyone. Had a couple of really good rounds, but Kenan, as his personality and the way that he wanted to ride and set up a bike, didn't fit in that paddock. So it was back to World Superbike and World Supersport, where he finished his career and became Mr. World Supersport. So, and I think that might have been the hesitation with Kenan and why he hasn't let Toprak go into MotoGP earlier, because the pieces of the puzzle just didn't fit right. Maybe with his Pramac team, yes, it's a factory-supported Yamaha team, and he's a contracted factory Yamaha rider. So John Kotzer asking the question here, does he get a top-spec bike? He will be on the latest, greatest spec. All 4 Yamahas on the grid at the moment are all the exact same latest, greatest spec bikes. So he will get that. But, you know, is there stipulations or things that if Toprak comes, he comes with full, first of all, and second, he comes and you listen to him. You know, he comes as very much a test rider for 2026, but you listen to him, you adapt things to him. That's going to be the defining, what's going to make or break Toprak's introduction into MotoGP.
Yeah, I think a big question that I would like to have answered, which we're not going to have answered, who's the most important part in this relationship? Is it Yamaha looking for Toprak or Toprak looking for Yamaha?
Yeah.
Toprak moving into MotoGP, or do Yamaha MotoGP feel that he's the next step,
Yes.
not to move ahead of Quartararo, but to assist Quartararo? So that to me would be a question. It's almost a which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing. But I would like to know that answer, because I honestly believe Toprak wouldn't do this deal just to get into MotoGP, because it can backfire very badly. And as you mentioned, a Ruben Zaus, Neil Hodgson, those Shaky Byrne, those moves just to get into MotoGP backfired on them, because it didn't work out. They were on, I'm going to say, substandard bikes at the time. Now Toprak's not getting on a Ducati. So to make that change, I'm going to say all those pieces of Keenan's puzzle have fitted. So Phil Marin, I would be very shocked if he doesn't go with. I would see he's the big part of the puzzle he goes with. And they've kind of stipulated, we're going to run the ship to benefit Keenan, Toprak, as opposed to benefit Yamaha. And we'll work from there. That would be my thinking as a Turkish supporter, Toprak. Yamaha, I think, will accept that, because their project has certainly moved forward, but maybe slower than they expected. So they're now saying we need someone to be assisting Fabio Quartararo to get this bike another step ahead. So, but I certainly think it's going to be a very mutually beneficial relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. As Sven kind of says, Yamaha having to improve and develop a race-winning bike, they might just listen to what Toprak has to say. I'm no doubt that Toprak will be spending a lot of time on the 2027 prototype during the course of next year, testing that, like Ducati are doing with Bulliger, letting him become a test rider with that Pirelli knowledge and just the way the rules are going. So anyway, it's either way, whichever way you look at it, I think it's fantastic and it's exciting exercise. I think it's going to add a little bit more spice to MotoGP. It's going to add a name that I've wanted to see for a very, very long time. You know, love him or hate him, there's a massive talent there in Toprak Razgatlioglu, and there's no doubt he's going to bring a lot of value, and Yamaha have made the right decision. Honda have lost out. We'll talk about them a little bit later, because they've also got to start now juggling some pieces and doing musical chairs, because there's lots going on with them, talking about riders and riders being available and the market the way it is. Honda have got some big decisions to make. Just rewinding back to the start of the show, SA Rider Watch, KJ Mognoniana also raced Red Bull Rookies Cup there. Unfortunately, not the weekend that he really wanted. But again, for KJ, it's just all about the experience, learning in what is just the school of hard knocks, that Red Bull Rookies Cup. If you look at the names that have got, every time the Red Bull Rookies kind of remind you of the riders that came there, Zarco, Binder, Martin, Bagnaia, Ayagura, Max Quiles now, Rueda. You just think, geez, can you imagine racing against those guys on those bikes? Just 16 or 15 to 17-year-olds wanting to prove themselves. So KJ, not the result that you would have wanted. He didn't have his AJ Fenter with him, because AJ was riding big bikes on the roads in some little island close here to me, and did very well. We'll have a full report on that in Motor Rider World soon, and we'll do a live chat with AJ. But yeah, KJ's just got to keep his head up and keep plugging away at what is a very difficult Red Bull Rookies Cup.
And I watched some of I think it was race 1. jeepers, it's competitive. Because everything is equal. There's, I don't know what it was, 16 guys were racing for first place. I might be exaggerating. It might have been 15 of them. And you can just see every single one of them believes he's going to win. And they'll do almost whatever it takes.
Absolutely. It is. It's just cutthroat. Johan Brits, Yarouche did have a good weekend. I think he has made a great start to life in Moto3. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Paul, I want to jump straight into KTM because it's a hot topic, especially on the back of Silverstone, where I got to really spend time with Brad and get some, inner workings and hear things and do things. Maverick Vinales, as soon as the KTMs were performing at Aragon, my mind just cast back to Maverick's debrief at Silverstone, where he just went, I'm not fussed about Silverstone. I knew it was going to be crap. It is crap. I can't wait for Aragon. Came to Aragon and KTM were competitive, a low grip track, just a couple of things that played in their favor. And for all intents and purposes, KTM were back to being the second best manufacturer at Aragon. We saw a much better qualifying from Brad straight into Q2, which just doesn't happen. Just showed the confidence. Brad looked a lot happier, looked better, looked like his old self pushing the bike. Pedro Acosta looked happier. Maverick, kind of, that little inconsistency of Maverick, so fast in the practices and that, couldn't quite put it together in qualifying, didn't get the starts in the races, wasn't really there, crashed out, and then goes and tops the testing times by breaking the all-time lap record, beating Mark, and typical Maverick. But anyway, a much better exercise for KTM. But there's, how much do we take from this? How much have we seen this before? Go to a track that kind of suits KTM. Yes, not problem solved, but yes, this could be the turning point. And then it's not the turning point. Okay, so yes, better result, but was it more a case of Neil Hodgson and then put it perfectly? Was it more case of the track bringing Ducati and putting Yamaha, Aprilia, and Honda behind KTM, or KTM actually bridging a gap, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's a question that we can't answer, because if you have a look, we had 3 KTMs make it directly into Q2. I don't think we've seen that the whole year. Well, we haven't, because Brad hasn't gone directly into Q2. I can't remember.
Argentina,
yeah, once. So I think it's a question, as I say, we can't answer, but certainly I'd rather take the positives out of it and say it was a overall good weekend for KTM. Whether it's a fact that track just suits them, there's low grip, but Silverstone had low grip, so what was why the big shift from Silverstone to Aragon? Is it because suddenly the ambient temperature is so much warmer? I honestly don't know, but certainly everything looked better. Maverick with his inconsistencies, I just don't understand this guy, where he's certainly being the most positive Maverick we've seen. Like you said, after the debrief at Silverstone, and even this weekend, to brush it off and then just go and whip everyone in the test session. And I say that relatively speaking, but he was the fastest guy out there on Monday. When last did we see a KTM faster than, over a full day's test? KTM for Monday ran in excess of 300 laps. That's a hell of a lot. They had a lot to test, but Maverick seems at the moment to be the KTM that has the most focused idea of where he's heading, because he puts it together mostly every single weekend. I think personally it was a good what's the right word? Not incentive, a good pick me up kind of thing, feel good story, if you want to say, that they had a good weekend. Yeah, they didn't get the end result on Sunday with Brad crashing out, Maverick not getting a result, but Acosta was 4th.
Yeah.
Say what you want. There were 3 Ducatis in front of him, and then it was him. And that was the whole of last year. The next best bike was always a KTM. So that to me will make them suddenly say, well, we shafted the Hondas and the Yamahas and the Aprilias. So good on us. Boys, stick to what you're doing. It's going in the right direction. But then I read Brad's comments and, oh no, we found something. We've been hearing this. I hope that Monday's test, and you saw the aero that they tested, looked very Ducati-esque. Now they've said with the test coming up the end of this week for their test riders, they need to sort out with all of that and then decide which way they're going. So I think at Mugello we'll get a very good idea. But I do think, the family story is now, hey, we've had a great weekend. Let's build on this. Let's not think about Silverstone and the absolute shocker that we had there. Let's look at this weekend. There were way more positives than negatives. Take that mindset with us to Mugello.
Yeah, a lot of positives, as you said. Like Wayne Taylor was saying, you don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but you almost don't want to get too excited because everything played in the favor of KTM here. Yeah. But as you said, you can't deny the work ethic of the riders, the team. Finally, they brought some new parts. Maybe the Bajaj money is kicking in or something's happened. They've been able to develop a couple of parts and bring them in. My only question with that is, how many parts have you brought in? Does each rider get one at this stage? Do they have their resources to build one of each? Ducati have got a 3D printer outside their pits printing parts that they can bolt on the bike. KTM doesn't have that luxury. If you crash, then does that nice new part go in the bin, and then it takes dust something off the old shelf and put it in the prototype stuff? And so yes, I want to be excited, and I was excited. It was great. If I paint the picture, I look at it and I go, I saw especially the three guys, Maverick, mainly Brad and Pedro, a lot more confident in the bike underneath them. Brad saying he felt that the direction they went with putting more weight on the front helped. His crash, which did look like a weird one, before his comments came out, I'd put it down to maybe the front tire pressure had just gone up and, went in at that, again, MotoGP is about increments, went in there 0.0001 of a tire pressure higher and it stuck the front. But his debrief afterwards saying the fact that he actually went slower into the corner is why he crashed. On the data showed that he went in a tiny bit slower. The front end wasn't as loaded, and that's what's tucked the front. And if you look at the riding styles of Maverick and Pedro, they keep that front brake on as late into the turn as possible with the bike upright. Then they put it in. Kind of what we've always kind of dissected and said. Brad's problem is he's not going into the corner with the bike upright. He's going in with it sideways, loading the front and then turning it in, and that's what's causing that feeling, loading the front too much. So there's a fine balance there, because Pedro, from the start of the year, that was riding those tighter lines, Kota tuck in the front, all his crashes were tuck in the front. I was watching him this weekend every time, especially when he was on board behind Pecco and he was going into the turns. I thought, that goes, the front end's got to go. It just, but it wasn't. So they found something there. But have they found something at the track where they were going to find something anyway? That's why I'm personally going to put more emphasis on the Catalunya test. Exactly what you've said. Right, Danny, Paul, here's the breakdown of what we said. I don't know how serious they're taking whatever Nea Bastianini says, because I think that exercise is over. But certainly Maverick, Pedro and Brad, who also, let's not forget, last week were in Austria for a one-on-one kind of, boardroom brawl with KTM to kind of sort this out, which is great because something happened. So things are at least happening. But Danny Pedrosa, Paul, here's the findings from Aragon. Let's see how they work at a more neutral track that kind of favors a lot more of the other guys. So not a track that's pushing Yamaha and Honda and Aprilia behind us, a track that, we're all kind of starting at a base. And are these changes and these parts actually getting us closer? Or was Aragon just a thumb suck and a bit of smoke and mirrors?
Yeah, I hope that's not the case. As you say, let's wait till Mugello in a couple of weeks' time. I think the trickle-down effect, and that's probably not the right phrase to use, but with this Bajaj money coming in, it releases a little bit of the financial burden that KTM are under. I understood. We've said it from the beginning, from kind of, when did the news break? Last year, September, October, about KTM's money woes. We've always said motorsport is checkbook racing. This is the pinnacle. So the bigger the checkbook, the more options you've got. Doesn't mean you're going to win, just means you got more options. KTM, we know from January till probably a month ago when that deal was done, are on the restricted budget. There's absolutely no doubt. Maybe now they've got a little bit more freedom, and in a very short space of time, they brought some stuff that could be beneficial, that should have maybe been delivered 2 or 3 months ago. That's a possibility. I'm not sure if that makes sense to anyone. I think that's how it could be working. But let's see what happens once we get to Mugello, because Mugello is also a track where there's not excessively hard braking. Yeah, turn one, and I think there's one other spot, but generally it's a nice, fast flowing track. Definitely suits Pedro. The way Maverick's riding at the moment, it should benefit him. And Brad's always been good there. So it'll be interesting to see. But saying that, everyone else feels the same. Most of the guys prefer fast flowing tracks.
I think, from a confidence standpoint, from the Brad Binder that I got to spend some time with at Silverstone, it was horrible. It was, you know what I mean? I just wanted to somehow cuddle the guy and just give him some confidence somewhere. He was really down. No matter what happened, just to see a Brad Binder riding that bike fast again, as someone said earlier, 12 laps. I know a couple of people are commenting, and he crashed it again, and blah, 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 blah. I don't even look at the crash. There was a comment made on Facebook, brilliant, Brad, loved it, well done, well done. I'd rather see you competing and crashing than, not competing and riding around. And I do too, especially with a rider with no confidence. There was a big confidence boost. Understanding why he crashed and using that data, going, okay, this is all starting to make sense now, is another massive positive. Mark Lloyd, part of the team, with a comment here. Thank you so much, Mark.
That's what we want to read. Yeah.
Anyway, it says, hi, Rob. Very positive weekend. So that's coming direct from the KTM garage and Brad's side.
Yeah, Rob, if I could just interrupt there.
So anyway, that's what I take out of it. I really do take.
Yeah, we've said this many times. MotoGP has become a sport where the margins are minuscule. So maybe Mark Lloyd has that info. What was Brad's entry speed? Because he said he went in there slower. Now, some guys might be picturing he went into corner 5, 30 k's an hour slower. I'd be shocked if he went in there 3 k's an hour slower. But those are the margins. We talk 0.2 of a second over a 1 minute 50 lap time. Now, to go into a corner, Brad didn't go in there 30 k's an hour slower. He went in, he probably applied 0.2 of a bar of pressure, less brake pressure on the front, so it didn't collapse the fork to the bottom of the stroke, put pressure on the tire like he had done for the other 10 laps, and he lost the front. That's the margins we're talking about. And I think most of us, we can't comprehend that. As I say, when I also read what Brad said, I wasn't thinking, oh, shame, he went in there and he was doing 100 and everyone else was doing 150. We're talking, the margins are so minuscule. But whoever made the comment saying it's better to see him racing in 5th place, almost challenging for 4th, and crashing, which is part of motorbike racing, than to see him in doing the same thing but in 16th or 17th.
I was going to say something. Yeah, Mike Fisher's got a comment here, and I just want to touch upon it before I finish the Brad conversation. KTM needs to switch to Öhlins, for goodness sake. Now, we've spoken about this lots. Watching the Moto2, Paul, and I looked at last year, WP came into Moto2 on the Calyx, and they battled. For most of the season, they battled. Pedro climbed on the Moto2 bike at one point, did some testing for them, and they switched on. That Manu Gonzalez and the WP, it just looks so sorted now. With everything that's happening with KTM, and we'll finish the KTM conversation with what might be happening for next year in terms of, there's still a lot of talk about KTM not being on the grid. But if I look at that exercise, if I was KTM now, you're clearly battling to get it right with your chassis. Calyx and WP, that partnership got it right pretty quickly. I think Sven, I think it was you a couple of weeks ago that said KTM just let Calyx develop a chassis for you. Honda tried it with a swing arm and stuff, but they've proven in Moto2 that whatever they're doing with that WP and that Calyx, whether it's a bit more flex or a bit of something somewhere, it's not as rigid, it's not carbon fiber. Maybe the carbon fiber is just, two positives pushing against each other, like I've spoken about so many times before. Take that pressure off. I know it comes as a financial. Calyx, I'm going to do it for free, but take that resource off you and say, right, Calyx, there we go. You tell us what you need, and you go do that, and you develop a MotoGP chassis with our engine around the WP. Make it work like you're making it in Moto2. I think that could be a really good exercise. Going back to the Brad, I can't even remember what I was going to say. But going back to the Brad comment before we actually, let's just finish off with the KTM, because we're right in it now, and then I'll finish off with the Brad. For 2026, Paul, there's massive talk still that KTM won't be in that paddock. I get asked about it on a daily basis, and it's not going away anytime soon. They've got a contract with Dorna, so yes, they should be there. Now there's this talk, Tech 3 going to be bought out by Honda potentially, and so less KTMs. For me, and I looked at it again this weekend, if I was KTM, I would pull out of MotoGP. I'd say, right, let's pull out of it. Let's get this right. Let's not waste all these resources doing this. Let's get out. We own Moto3. We dominate Moto3. Let's use Moto2 as the branding exercise that it is. Dennis Onchu winning on WP suspension, KTM branding, great. Leave those exercises there. MotoGP is hurting you more than it's helping you. Let's take a step back. Develop a bike with Kalex. Do something. Of course, it's not as easy as that because you've got 2 grid spots available, a Brad and a Pedro and blah, 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 blah. As I spoke about earlier, Honda are in this predicament now where they've almost got too many rider options and not enough bikes. Jorge Martin, Pedro Acosta, okay, the Toprak one's been sorted now. Joan Mir, Luca Marini, Somcat Chentra. I think that's a very easily disposable rider, unfortunately, no disrespect to him. But when you start hearing those rumors of Tech 3 being taken by Honda and Honda, the powerhouse that they are, and the desperation for them to succeed, Colin Kane, is Lewis Hamilton still looking at buying a MotoGP team? Please don't. That name's not allowed to be mentioned on this show. If I look at that, I mean, the perfect situation or a situation could be, right, we're stepping out as KTM. The 2 spots will be owned by Red Bull Racing. Honda, you can buy those 2 spots as Red Bull Racing, a la Max Verstappen, Formula One a couple of years ago. You take those 2 spots. You've got to take Pedro. You get Brad Binder as a bonus. There we go. Well done. Jorge Martin can go in the Tech 3 team or the factory team, and Mir and Marini. Your rider problem is then solved. KTM, take that step back, come back in 27, ready to go, rather than this up and down and you're performing, you're not. You know what I mean? I think that situation to me plays out quite nicely.
I haven't thought about that in any way. The rumors that I've always had in my mind, we're definitely going to see 2 factory KTMs on the grid next year. I still think that as much as what you're saying is correct, I still think we'll definitely see the 2 factory KTMs. Whether it's Brad and Pedro, that we'll have to see. Time will play that out. The new rumors about Tech 3 possibly being a Honda deal, that makes sense. My concern, and I'm going to use Andrea Dovizioso as an example, he stepped out of MotoGP for 1 year, came back onto the Yamaha the year after he had stepped out, and he just couldn't catch up. He couldn't. So that would be a little bit of a worry for me, because if KTM do in their entirety step out of MotoGP for 2026 to regroup, build up a bit of cash flow, and work on their 2027 project, they're missing out on all the advancements. And I know everything changes for 2027, but racing, you've got to be in the racing to race. And that would just be something that I would be a bit concerned about, that to skip a full season, you're not keeping up with anything. And I know everything changes for 2027. So what you're saying, it could be a very good decision, but it could also be a very detrimental one. So I don't know, but my feeling, we'll definitely see 2 factory KTMs on the grid. Maybe not 4.
Listen, it's just a scenario
Sure.
With all the talk still going on, it's just a scenario that kind of played out in my mind, because obviously KTM and Dorna can't afford to lose two spots on the grid. BMW aren't going to buy them. Suzuki aren't coming back. Realistically, the only ones would be a Honda going, yes, please, we've got the money, we'll take them. We've got Martins wanting to ride on our bikes. We've got Mir Marini. We've got Manu Gonzalez we want to sign. We've got all these riders. We need spaces for them. We'll take them. KTM, goodbye. You go carry on dominating Moto3 and Moto2. Do your thing there and develop a bike. That was just a thought process that I had. Going back to Brad and his performance, emphasizing the fact of qualifying well. Qualified 6th. Okay, sprint race showed if you get a cock start in MotoGP, you're almost over. Okay, but Zeki kind of was the one little thing in the sprint race there that kind of yeah, exactly. But in the main race Sunday, Brad gets a start and there he is. And that's something that Brad will know, KTM will know, everyone will know. But again, it just highlights the fact. I mean, Bezzecchi couldn't do it on the Sunday race because it's a different ball game. Tires, fuel load, everything changes on the bike with, as you said, all these tiny little increments. So again, just that fact of the importance of getting straight into Q2. That's got to be your first aim. Whether you throw all 10 of your soft tires or whatever, how many soft tires you get at it just to get into Q2, that exercise proved itself once again this past weekend.
Yeah, definitely. And Rob, there's nothing more we can add to that. Not that we've ever blamed Brad for it. We don't know the ins and outs of how they run their strategy for that. And it's not like Formula One, but it certainly has become very strategic and very a pressure cooker situation, because do you go out in the first 5 minutes of Q1, and set a benchmark lap and hope someone crashes? Or do you reserve yourself and see what the time is? And like they say, Jack can do, you take your brain out of your head for 1 minute and 48 seconds and you just give it everything. It's a very difficult one, but we've said it whole of last year, whole of this year so far. And there we see the benefit. I think, first of all, it just allows the whole team to settle down, because it's one pressure cooker situation that they're taken out of. They don't have to deal with it. So Q1 is null and void once you're in Q2. You can now focus and watch exactly what's going on. Everyone can step up. As you say, you've now got additional tires. Should you want to, you can use those. The only thing you have to make sure you don't do in Q2 is crash. That's the only thing. And Brad didn't do that, and he was in Q2 and 6th place, I think it was, on the grid start. Makes a world. We've always said be on the front 2 rows. It's imperative.
Yeah, it showed itself this weekend, and I agree with Alex Fullion. If Brad didn't crash, I think there was a really good result on the cards there. But hindsight is we all know that saying. Paul, I want to move on to Ducati, and with everything that's happened with Jorge Martin lately, I'm going to quickly bring up the Jorge Martin thing, because he released a statement as well, kind of, between Silverstone and Aragon. That relationship is him and Aprilia, blah, 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 blah. And again, I look at the whole Jorge Martin exercise and the fact that you see very little Jorge Martin supporters, and he doesn't even have a fan club, or he doesn't have a big enough one to warrant camera time type thing. This is our MotoGP world champion. And I watched this weekend, and Marquez, and you look at the failings of Pecco Bagnaia up until now. Pecco's a phenomenal champion. I'm a massive fan. He's a true champion. Great to see him back up there. We'll talk about that now. But you saw kind of chinks in his armor in terms of developing. Martin is not a bike developer. He's proven that I need to climb on something that's ready to race and go fast. Then I can go fast. He came into MotoGP, the KTM. He had a signed contract with KTM. That bike's not ready for me to win on. I'm climbing on a Ducati. Now I go to Aprilia. They've looked after me. Ducati told me to get lost. No. My talent's enough. Oh, shit, hang on. My talent's not enough. I'm going to have to work hard and develop this bike and do laps. And no. This is a cock idea. Goodbye. Thank you. I want to climb on something that's race ready to go. And I think ideally, if he could have his Pramac Ducati ride back, he would have it. But I looked at this weekend and Marc Marquez again, and how methodical he was, and how even after Silverstone, when things aren't going well, the biggest difference between him and Pecco is Marc can ride past problems. Marc was able to see at the start of the year, riding the 24 and the 25 bike, in that little bit of time that he had on it, go, no, 25 is not ready, I'm sticking the 24. Pecco, to his credit, had the confidence to say, no, I'll take the 25. I know this team works. We'll get it right. And then that'll maybe be the edge that we have. But for Marc to have that know-how to go, no, this bike doesn't, I can feel it, doesn't feel right. This is ultimately, I know we talk about the marketing and that all played into the hands, but there were all those caricatures of Gigi Dall'Igna with Marc Marquez and all his sperm all over him, like loving it. And you can understand why now. You look at the performance again this weekend. Marc can you imagine that data? Gigi must wait for Marc to come in, plug that bike in, and just get that data up there. And it's like he must just relieve himself every time, because he's like, I'm looking at the best data from the best rider in the field at the moment. Whichever way you want to look at it, it's the best rider in the field at the moment. How he can he can just feel everything and translate that into the data, and the data that comes through is just priceless, and it's benefited everyone. Those comments from some, it's a mate of mine in South Africa that used to do the show with me, when he said, I told you that Marquez it won't take long for Mark to ruin Ducati. He become like Honda, where they follow him and he ruins it. And I look at this after this weekend and I go, how can people think that Mark's going to ruin Ducati? Again, this is the beauty of MotoGP. Silverstone, Ducati are over. A brilliant resurgence. KTM must die. Fabio Quartararo and Yamaha are back. 2 weeks later, Yamaha nowhere. A brilliant nowhere. Ducati dominating once again, and KTM on the bubble. This is the beauty of MotoGP, is you can't really do these things. But the Marc Marquez exercise again this weekend it just blew my mind again. I watched that guy, and I know it was a dominant performance. In that race, when Brad set the fastest lap, the new lap record, it's like, yes. And Neil Hodgson and them still took my excitement away and was like, that just, no disrespect to Brad, but that just proves that Mark's sandbagging. Yeah. He's got more to give. And as soon as he said that, I went, you bastard, you're right. Because 3 laps later, Mark goes and puts 2 fastest laps in a row in. And then with 3 laps to go on 20-something old Michelin tires that aren't supposed to work, on a cock track, a Ducati that's not supposed to work, Mark's ruining it. He goes and obliterates the previous lap record by almost a second. 56-something, 50 or whatever it was, 56. I mean, it is. Love him or hate him or whatever you want to say about Marc Marquez, go watch that race weekend. Dominated every session, led every session, won every did everything right. You can't help but put up your hands and go, you know what? There's a reason why this guy's an 8-time world champion and Ducati wanted him so badly.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've said it many times. They looked at when they made the signing, which was almost to the day a year ago. It was the weekend of Mugello. So next weekend's race. It's a year ago that they announced that they weren't signing Martin and they were signing Marc Marquez. It makes you think that behind the scenes, a lot more goes on than we, the general public, the TV viewing public, are aware of. But I'm going to just highlight, I agree fully with what you say. I just want to highlight something that it seems like every weekend now, at some point during the weekend, Pecco is turning around and saying, I don't know how Mark does that. Now that to me, because he did it, I think he did it after Q2. It might have been a Friday afternoon session. I can't remember, but Pecco's the interview asked him a question, do you think you found something? And Mark did it, and he just said, I don't know how he can do it. Now that to me, and I agree with you, Pecco's been a very worthy champion. But to me, that's now still in his head. And he needs to try and clear this, which is not an easy thing to do when he's not even second in the championship. He's third, and he's almost 4 full races behind in points, Sunday races. I know we get Saturday sprint points. I just think Pecco needs to have a bit of a reset. He had a great weekend this weekend, and you can see a happy Pecco is visible on the bike. The fact that he made some very minor changes. I listened to the Oxley Bomb podcast, and they were saying they're not sure if that's the only thing, So there must be other things happening, but he certainly seemed more G'd up. But he keeps saying, I don't know how Mark can do that. Now they're on equal equipment. So, we can understand Alex is on a bike that we know is magnificent. So Alex has almost got a get out of jail free card to be where he is in the championship. And I'm not taking anything away from him. But once again, you see a Marc Marquez where he even said halfway through the race, when Brad set those fastest laps or the fastest lap, at that point he was like, hey, I better catch a wake up. I'm falling asleep here. Those weren't his words, but that's what he implied. Concentrate, which is why he made a mistake in Austin, which is why he made a mistake in Silverstone. And then you see him get back fully focused, and then he shows everyone what he really can do. He just blitzes it. But saying that, Pecco's fastest lap on the second last lap was only I think it was 100th of a second off Mark's time. But it wasn't Mark's time. Yes. But anyway, it looks like there's definitely been an upswing in the resilience, the feeling of Pecco, and he definitely looked better, although he had a shocking Saturday sprint race.
Just talking about Ducati, where that bike is just so good is temperamental. And I had the word in my mind earlier and I couldn't get it, but I've written it down now. Temperamental. If I look at that KTM, Brad went in slightly slower and the front was slightly not loaded.
Yeah.
Crash.
Yeah.
Fabio
Crash.
Quartararo, the tire temperature's not right, you crash, or it doesn't work. Bezzecchi, if it, on the Aprilia, and then crash, it doesn't work. That Ducati just seems to be a lot less temperamental. It can adjust and it can adapt itself no matter the conditions. Yes, they suffered in Silverstone, but you didn't see Ducati skittling left, right, and center. Okay, Alex Marquez because of the ride height device and stuff, but in the race conditions, they were still able to manage it. Mark pushed too hard early on and was lucky that the race got red flagged and restarted fine. But it's a lot less temperamental than the other bikes, and that's where the bike is so good. And I think that going to the Pecco situation is what he misses with the 25. The 25 seems to be a little bit more temperamental, certainly in front-end feel. And as you said, you can physically see when Pecco Bagnaia is enjoying the bike. You can see his riding style. Jack Miller commented, when I was riding behind Pecco, he looked stiff on the bike. He was riding very upright, like my old school riding style, rather than the new school hanging off the bike. Pecco Bagnaia, and you could visibly see it. From the sprint race where he suffered, ran wide, didn't have the feeling, finished nowhere, to the main race where he was competitive again and he was right in the mix. I think a couple of things happened there. They found something with the bike. As you said, Oxley, a podcast, they nailed it. They showed a picture. Matt Oxley showed a picture on Facebook, the bigger discs that Pecco Bagnaia was running. So obviously more stopping power, wasn't having to hold onto the front brake as much into the turn, was scrubbing off more speed for the turn, more controlled in the turn. Yes, maybe that helped. But I also think a mental shift kind of happened. I think he got a good start. You know, he got passed by Pedro, he passed back, and he kept himself right in the race there. And almost like a Brad thing, when you're at the front there and you're competing, you're confident. Then all of a sudden you're not thinking about what the bike's doing now, you're thinking about going fast. When your confidence is down, you're thinking, oh, the bike, oh no, you're riding stiff. You know, so I think a lot of it was also down to the fact of Pecco just saying to himself, listen, can't carry on like this. You know, if I carry on like this, I might as well just give Mark and them the trophy now already, which in many ways has already happened. But there was something they found with the bike, with the GP25, bigger discs or whatever else, but more of a mental shift for me that Pecco went, I've got to, especially going into Mugello now, you know, Italian track, Misano coming up soon. You can't have a Marc Marquez coming and beating you in your own backyard, you know. So it's time for Pecco to compete. And he made that switch as a true champion does. And I'm hoping, I think it is, I'm hoping that Mugello can really be the kickoff for Pecco Bagnaia because he can go and compete there.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. But I think what he also needs to do, and we discussed it last time on the show, he must also not focus solely on Mark. Yes, focus on Mark. That's who you want to beat. But he mustn't forget that Alex is 50 odd points ahead of him in the championship. So he also needs to take into account that he better start doing something about Alex Marquez because, and we all thought it, let's be quite honest, race 1, Alex second, race 2, second. Is it a bit of a fluke thing? We weren't expecting him to be this consistent. You know, Alex has been the highlight of the year because it was highly unexpected. I think Pecco, and I mentioned it last time, I think he loses sight of that and he only focuses on Mark. Maybe if he shifts his focus and now for the next 2 races, if he can't beat Mark, he consistently beats Alex. That'll also do his confidence the world of good to say, okay, so maybe this 25 bike is a little bit better than the 24 bike. So I think that's it. But certainly it's going to be a very tricky weekend for Mark coming into Mugello because he's going into enemy territory. No matter what you say, anyone who's been to Mugello, and I was there a few years ago, that place is going to be painted yellow. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
And Marc Marquez is the target of their aggression. The only maybe little bit saving grace for Mark is he's on a Ducati and it's the factory bike. So, but certainly he's going into enemy territory, and which I don't think it's like water off a duck's back. He doesn't let it get him down. But it's certainly not going to be easy for him. And it's also something that, as much as Pecco has been very respectful and told the fans not to boo when Mark's on the podium, I think it does G Pecco up because, hey, these guys really want me to do well. So it's going to be a very interesting, this weekend coming up is going to have a very different dynamic to what we've just seen now.
Yes.
So, you know, it's almost a reverse shift where we were in Spain at Aragon, Marc Marquez territory. Now we're going to Rossi's territory with his golden boy Pecco. I'm not going to say it's Pecco's territory. I don't believe it is. But so it'll be a very interesting scenario. The technicalities of the mental game shift completely going to Italy.
Yeah, as Wayne Taylor says, yeah, Mark will feed off the negativity. Dirk Beekman with a comment here. You speak about Mark as if he walks on water. However, as a great rider on making it work on the most dominant bike on the grid, well, ... You know, and that's generally the argument with a lot of people that aren't Marc Marquez fans, which is absolutely fine. You know, my rebuttal to that is, yes, it's the best bike on the grid. Absolutely. You know, no problem. He's going a second faster on the same bike that Jorge Martin had last year. And he's doing it. He's making it, you know, he's putting in the fastest lap times with 2-3 laps to go. He's won 7 out of the 7 sprints. This is a guy that was on his deathbed just over a year ago. His career was over. Everyone was over, you know, just get out of here. It's a guy that's been through a lot of mental trauma and stuff. You know, and I am a Marquez fan. I'm a Rossi fan. I'm a everyone fan. I do, as a fan of the sport, as a journalist, as a whatever you want to call me, watch Mark this weekend, and I've been impressed by him many times. Trust me, you know, when he won on the Honda, he wasn't on the best bike. You know, if you look, the next Honda was 3rd, 4th, 5th. Rossi, Lorenzo, you know, Dovi, they were on the best bikes, and Mark beat them on Hondas, while the Crutchlows and Danny's were crashing and hurting themselves on the Hondas. Mark was crashing, but he was still winning. So it's not a case of walking on water, but in many ways, if I really had to say it, it is in MotoGP at the moment. He's on last year's bike that won the World Championship, granted, but so is a lot of other riders. And he's pushing it even further. He's taking it even further. Why did Ducati not choose the man that was winning on their motorcycle and won the championship for them? They gave up 2 bikes with Pramac and the world champion and the number 1 plate for Marc Marquez. I think that tells you enough. He's leading the championship. The championship's not over. Kudos to Alex Marquez for making it work and sticking at it and still keeping this championship somewhat alive, because Pecco up until now has failed at that. Yeah, I understand your frustrations as non-Marc Marquez fans that everyone talks about Marc Marquez all the time, but he puts himself in that spotlight, if you know what I mean. Look at the size of the guy's fan club area there this weekend. So I said, did you see anything Jorge Martin? Have you seen a Jorge Martin fan club that big? You know, I still don't think it's on Rossi's level. I agree with that, but it's certainly not far off, and it's certainly the Rossi of modern day time, if you know what I mean. If you're comparing eras, Mark's doing it. Mark's controlling MotoGP the way Rossi controlled MotoGP before Mark got into MotoGP, and he's controlling it now. He's not doing the Aragon and the Kota mistakes where he's crashing. He's managing these races, like Neil Hodgson put it perfectly. He's managing the race. He was riding at a level that he went, cool, I've got a gap here. Oh, Binder's just putting the fastest lap. Okay, let me go put in some 2 bangers quickly, pull out 0.4 of a second, and then manage this. Neil Hodgson and then put it perfectly. To go fast on a Ducati, you need to look slow. When you watch Mark, he looks slow. It's not like he was on the Honda where you could see he was making up time on the brakes, and he barely hangs off. He barely scrapes his knee. He's in and out of he's just making it look so easy. And it's just, I'm enjoying watching it, to be honest. I really, and I can stand that the Marc Marquez fans probably aren't, but as a motorcycle fan, I don't know how you can't watch that and witness this and go, you know what, I don't like you, but, you know, kudos to you.
Yes. Yeah, Rob, and if you just think of, he's the first rider since 2015, which was his record, to dominate every session. And he could have done it in 2019, but it was also in Spain. He could have dominated every session, but he chose not to ride the warm-up session because it was raining that particular day. So he didn't do it. You know, since he did it in 2015, he was then out injured for a while, but Dovi was on the best Ducati. Bagnaia's been on it, Martin's done it, and none of them have managed to achieve total domination over a weekend. None of them. Mark's done it again, breaking his own record, and also, I don't want to highlight that we think the sun shines out of his behind, but you got to admire the guy because he does something that nobody else on a Ducati or any other bike for that matter can do. But clearly, at the moment, he is the dominant rider on the best bike, and he's taking advantage of that. Would Luca Marini be able to do that if you put him on the same bike? Would Miguel Oliveira, Jack Miller? I don't believe so. So you've given the best rider the best equipment, and he's making use of it. So don't shoot him down in flames. Maybe shout at Gigi for signing Mark and putting him in that position. But certainly it's a very love him or hate him scenario. But I agree with you, Rob. As a fan of MotoGP, admire what he's doing. That's all it is, because he is special. There's absolutely no doubt. And, as we've said many, many, many times, there was the Rossis, the Duans, the Agostinis. In your era, that's how it is. I think now, just because the bikes are so much closer in terms of rideability, we're not going to see that domination like we used to see in the old days, because the bikes are, I don't want to say they're easier to ride, because we're still seeing one bike and kind of one rider dominating, but the bikes are closer than possibly in the Duan era. Or think of Rossi when they started, never mind Rossi on the two-stroke. The first year he didn't win the championship. He crashed in the rain. The second year on that Nastro Azzurro Honda, he smoked everyone. Then he jumped on the four-stroke. And I think he won 12 out of 15 races. He was just so far ahead. I don't think we're going to see that kind of domination anymore.
Moving on from that, love Sven Gruner's comment. Brad would give him a run. Couldn't agree with you more, Sven. Couldn't agree with you more. Moving on to Paul, as I said earlier, this is how cutthroat MotoGP is. Fabio Quartararo and Yamaha, Silverstone on top of the world. Okay, yes, we know what happened with his ride-out device, but speed-wise, we're there. We're making progress. We're getting this. Jack Miller, put in a good ride. There were some good glimpses from him there. Great. Get to Aragon, and the failings and the temperament of the Yamaha come through the low grip tracks, and Fabio, seeing him, the frustration coming out again, that immature Fabio coming out again, wanting to hit his bike and stuff. Then you look at that and you go, okay, this is where Fabio needs to just wind it in. He's got to understand where they are. There's going to be these weekends where you're on a high, and there's going to be these weekends where you're on a low. You've got to manage that. Credit to him and Yamaha, they did slightly bring it back, got a better qualifying, looked racy at parts of the race. In the Sunday's main race, didn't really get going. In the sprint race, had a little bit about him, but then fell back. But this is where Yamaha still are at the moment. Very much how KTM are going to improve at tracks like this, Yamaha are going to digress at tracks like this, and it showed itself there, and it just shows that it's still very much a work in progress. Alex Follien, was Yamaha running the V4? No, they weren't. There was talk they were going to bring it out in yesterday's test. They didn't. They're saving it now for Catalunya, with Dovi and Cal Crutchlow, I think, are going to climb on that bike and have it there. Augusto Fernandez was also in full factory Monster Energy Yamaha colors, doing some testing at Aragon as well. So just like KTM and all the teams, I suppose, putting in the hard work, but again, just showing that temperamental side of the Yamaha that I don't know if the V4 engine's going to be the answer at low grip tracks, if the engine just is the big problem at a circuit like this, where it just produces power in the wrong way and causes spinning or whatever. But certainly that confidence gained from Silverstone, you kind of kicked in the teeth again coming to a track like Aragon.
Yeah, listen, and I empathize with Quartararo. 3 pole positions in a row. Silverstone, he should have won. Let's be quite honest. The MotoGP gods were not smiling on him. In all fairness, and I read a thing, 2022 was the last time Yamaha won a MotoGP race. So it's been a while, and that would have been absolutely, it would have done them so much good. However, like you say, now they come to this track, and we saw his frustrations. But he needs to curtail that, because it's not helping the project in any way, because his crew are doing 100%. Like with Brad, we've heard how many times that they are all putting in 100% effort. And then you see the rider kind of almost blaming the third party, the bike. I think he needs to just curtail that. I understand he's an emotional guy. You see it. He burst into tears when he should have won and he didn't. And that's fantastic. But just curtail that, get back to the pits. He was the one making the mistakes. Yes, the bike, he was hitting the brakes, and it was definitely wanting to spit him off. There's no doubt. I think purely because of his talent, a couple of times it didn't spit him off, but it made him run wide and messed up really good laps. he needs to just curtail that, put his mind back into whether it's qualifying or race mode and say, where do I need to rectify this? How do I need to rectify this? I think he gets to a point specifically in the race where he's just, I don't care. I'm going to go as hard as I can. And if I'm 15th and I crash, or I'm 10th and I crash, makes no difference. I think he needs to just curtail that, whether it's enthusiasm or whatever it is, I don't know. He needs to, the team are working as a team, and he is their lead rider. So sometimes I just wish he'd take a deep breath, settle down, get focused again. And I could be 100% talking out of turn, but that's what it comes across as. Yes. So, let's see how it goes. I think that Mugello is going to be good for them. Their problem is the long straight. And we saw it at Silverstone. They just get eaten by everyone else, but obviously the Ducatis and the KTMs. Now, if we've got a circuit that's fast and flowing, Fabio's on it, no doubt. But let's just say, for example, he manages through the fast sections. He passes a Pedro Acosta. Man, Acosta's just going to blow past him down that straight at Mugello. And we know all the overtaking happens as they go over that rise, 250 meters before they hit in the brakes. So he's going to have to, once again, settle down, regroup for that next third of the lap. Where am I going to pass this guy? And I need to pull a gap. So it'll be interesting to see how he deals with that. And we're talking specifically him because he's by far the leading light in the Yamaha team at the moment.
Absolutely. Shane Sparks asking the question of any talk about Brad moving, anything at all, ? Shane, nothing at the moment. He is contractually bound to KTM. So either two options. We're going to see him on a KTM next year, racing on a KTM again, or if, as I said earlier on in the show, if KTM were to make the decision to pull out, those two spots are taken by Red Bull Racing or Honda by the two spots from Dorna, because the two spots can't just go away. Only way Dorna will let KTM out of that is if those two spots are filled, even if I don't even know if Dorna or Liberty Group will let that happen. I don't know what will happen. But we'll see Brad on the grid next year, most likely in KTM colors from 2027 onwards. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. So it's a question mark that we all, as Brad Binder fans, ask ourselves with every passing round, really. Paul summed up Yamaha perfectly. Honda, a couple of things that stood out for me at Honda this weekend. The first being, I couldn't believe this stat. Luca Marini obviously missed the race meeting because he had a testing crash for Suzuka and really hurt himself, punctured lung and sternum and all kinds of things, speedy recovery. Wish him well. The guy hasn't crashed a MotoGP bike once this year. He hasn't crashed once this year. Yeah. And then he goes and tests a superbike at Suzuka and crashes and hurts himself. I couldn't believe that stat, that the guy has not crashed once. And I've said it so many times leading up to this with Marini. You're not getting a guy that's going to go get you podiums and win races. You're not getting that. But what you are getting is a trustworthy guy that's going to put in laps, bring the bike home and translate that data and give you valuable data and use that data. And when I heard that stat, I was like, that just kind of cast it in stone, that's exactly, and that is his value to Honda. I said it a couple of weeks ago with Martin flying around, Pedro Acosta and all these names, the Manu Gonzalez and all, David Alonso, all these names. Surely a Luca Marini can't find himself. And when he at Silverstone, when he said, no, we're speaking and the negotiations are going well, I was like, God, is that just something he's telling himself? Or as Rossi's half brother, is he secured a ride because of that? But I heard that stat and I went, that's where his main value to not only Honda but any MotoGP team really is.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I also saw that stat showing all those, and I was gobsmacked to see. It's very seldom you get a guy 8 races in or 7 races. He obviously didn't race this weekend, who hasn't had one tip off. No. And that's him. So, he certainly brings the value. The other side of the coin, you could be asking yourself, okay, so is he not pushing to 100%?
Well, that's
the other question. Then you look at Mir, and I don't have the points table from after this weekend. I don't think Mir's caught up to Marini in points. Marini had scored points in 6 out of 7 races this year. Remember, last year, he only scored his first point in the second or third last race because of tire pressure issues with someone else. So he's certainly, the Honda has improved, but he's also upped his game tremendously. And it's very sad that accident happened to him on a World Superbike. But I think if he said at Silverstone his negotiations were going well, this might just turn the table. Now, which Honda would have known beforehand that Toprak was off the table in terms of negotiations there. They would have known that. But does it now take away from Marini because he's had such a big accident? So we know he missed this weekend. He'll miss Mugello in 2 weeks. Then there's a 3-week break. But it's 5 weeks of off the bike, exactly what we spoke about with Darren earlier in the show, and Martin missing consecutive races. Is he now going to be in a situation where he feels he has to come back? He's not at 100%. He's not even at 95%. But if he's not there to show face, his ride is up for grabs. And that's the scenario these guys find themselves in. Mir could probably, if the role was reversed, be a little bit more circumspect in recovery because he's got a contract for next year. Marini doesn't have that affordability. Yes, he said the negotiations are going well, but suddenly he's not sleeping so easy through no fault of his own. Yes, the crash was his fault, or the crash happened, but through no fault of his own in terms of his MotoGP negotiation. That circle has suddenly become much smaller. I think he's now suddenly not as confident as he was maybe after Silverstone.
Absolutely. Looking at the championship, Joan Mir is 18th on 27 points. Luca Marini is 13th on 38 points.
Yeah,
he's ahead of Brad Binder in 14th on 35 points, and Bastianini is in 15th on 35 points. Yeah. Just shows you the season that Brad's had. And
sure.
People can tell me some comments about Brad's not worthy and what. People can tell me that all day. Brad has been the top non-Ducati for the last couple of seasons. In the past 2 or 3 years was 6th, 4th, and 5th last year.
Yeah.
His worth is there. I know race wins and whatever. We always go on about stats. I know stats, but we can't forget very important stats, which is championships.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Talking about Honda, Joan Mir, a much better weekend from him. Okay. Again, when your luck's down, your luck's down. You have a Jack Miller taking you out in the sprint race, but main race looked really good. When they showed that battle that he was having with Digi and some of those moves that he pulled, I went, oh, Jean, what are you doing? Like, you crash all the time, you're gonna crash. But they found something, because we'll talk about Zarco just now, but Joan Mir seemed to find something at a track where the Honda wasn't working well. And if I look at the Yamaha kind of situation and how they went backwards, but they managed it. Honda, if anything, came out better with Joan Mir. Certainly from Joan Mir's side, because he competed. I felt bad for him because he was making those passes and he was just getting blown down the straight, but it was certainly the best. I mean, it was a 7th place. It's not exactly something to kind of parade around about. But then again, the stat coming, it's his best result for 3 years or 2 years.
3 years. Yeah.
When I looked at that, I was like, that's how bad that exercise has been. And again, going back to how many names are being thrown around with Honda, Martin, Mir, Marini, where are you going to put all these guys, type thing. And I looked at that and I went, that's the value of Joan Mir. I have not seen much value in Joan Mir on a Honda up until this weekend where I saw, but it's because he stayed on and he added value. The guy can race a motorbike when it's probably got a Jorge Martin kind of thing. I'm not here I can't develop anything. I can't run a bath. But if you put me on something that works, that I can push to my potential, I can make it work. And there was glimpses of that this weekend, which for him and Honda at a track that they knew they were going to suffer at is 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, most certainly. And you would never bet anything to say that, first of all, he would be faster than Zarco, first of all, and second of all, that he would stay on. Because, and everyone knows, I'm a Honda man through and through. So whenever I watch him and I see I always look. I look where Brad is, I look where Marquez is, and then I look where any Honda is. And I'm very impartial. Honda is Honda. I don't care who rides it. Please just win. And then I see Mir's the top Honda. I'm like, oh, jeez, this isn't going to last long.
Yeah,
and then suddenly we've got 3 laps to go, and he's in a ding-dong battle, and he's still upright. So I think a very good weekend for him, and exactly the opposite for Zarco, coming off 2 fantastic results. And then I just get the feeling Zarco, when he's had good results, he's like, okay, I've done something great this year. The rest of the year doesn't matter. I just get that feeling with him that it's not a every single week I have to perform. And funny enough, I must think who said it. It might have been on that Oxley podcast where they said Zarco and Brad Binder are the two riders who every single weekend, every session give you 100%. But to me, sometimes he just doesn't look like that. And this weekend, to me, Zarco looked like he's had two great race weekends. He needs a weekend off just to do the Johan Zarco type of thing. And I'm probably being 100% disrespectful and unfair to him, but that's what it looks like to me.
I was going to touch upon Zarco because this is my frustration with Zarco. I think we've seen it even when he was on the Ducatis, the Pramac Ducati, the best bike. You would have these 2 or 3 rounds where he performs, and it's Zarco. We didn't see it enough on the Ducati. Yes, he eventually got his race win, but there were podium rides and second places and good rides, and then he would just go asleep for 3 or 4 rounds. Yeah. And I'm hoping that's not the case here now. I'm hoping he kind of kicks himself back into gear at Mugello. But again, I watched it this weekend and I went, geez, how do you go from those 2 performances to he was nowhere this weekend. He was just forgotten about this weekend, And then straight away, as I had that thought, the next thought in my mind was, I've seen this before with Zarco. A couple of great results, and then he just goes missing for a couple of rounds, and then he puts in a couple of rounds again, then he goes missing for a couple of rounds. So, and again, we've spoken about it before, Paul. There's all the talk around, I talk about, Honda don't have enough bums for their factory seat. Zarco's another guy going, I'd love to go to the factory Honda team. And we're all going, please, just stay where you are. It's a happy, healthy environment. Don't fall in the Martin trap of independence not good enough. I want factory. I want that prestige. I want that paycheck. It can have a reverse effect, as we've seen from Martin. You're comfortable. Stay where you're comfortable, especially where you are. You're developing. You're doing a great job. Just stay there. But could all this be on his mind now? And like I said, maybe overconfident from a couple of really good races. Does he do that? We've gone, okay, well, my job's done well. Has he gone into Aragon going, this is not a track I particularly like. The Honda's not going to work. He just seems a bit temperamental. Use the word again, temperamental. But he does seem a bit temperamental like that. That's why he hasn't really kicked off in his MotoGP career. You know what I mean? And that sounds weird from a guy that's won and lots of podiums. And the guy was a 2-time back-to-back Moto2 winner. The guy, he came on that Tech 3 Yamaha and he was like the business. KTM signed him because he was the business. That certainly had an effect and interrupted his MotoGP career. But he's never really kicked on in MotoGP, and I think it's purely down to that temperament.
Yeah, as I say, that's exactly how I feel about him. And we've said it many times on the show, Rob, to be competitive at MotoGP, to fight for a championship, you have to be on it 21 out of 21 races. Your margin for I can have a weekend off kind of attitude just doesn't cut it anymore. Possibly when you get to round 19 of the 21 and you've got a 65-point lead, you can say, okay, well, I'll settle for a 6th or 7th place here because it'll move me almost to the championship. But when you don't have that ability, which Zarco, nobody at the moment does, you can't switch off. And as we've just said, I just get that he and Morbidelli is another case which we haven't even mentioned yet. But also you see that with Frankie, a couple of great rides, and then you have to look down the timesheets. Oh, he actually was there for the weekend, and I think that's the biggest difference. All these guys are the best of the best at riding, but to do it week in and week out, at the top of your game, from Friday 10 o'clock in the morning till Sunday 3 o'clock when the race is done, to be that focused takes a very special breed of person. That's why so few people ever win the world championship, because to be on it all the time is really, I think it's mentally very taxing, and only a few of them can actually consistently do it. And that's what separates the Marks, the Peccos, the Valentino Rossis, Jorge Lorenzos from the rest of the field, who on their day are as good as anyone else.
Paul, before I get into a question here from Michael for you, which we'll end off on, and it'll be a question, it's aimed at me, but I'll put it on to you and everyone in the comments. Just want to touch upon Frankie Morbidelli and especially Firmin Aldeguer, who I thought were exciting on that Sunday race. I loved loved the battle between them. You know, you had the young guy in Furman who, you know, he pulled a couple of moves on Pedro. He's really just like, I'm not here just to sit behind people and look at names. I'm here to compete, and if I've got to ride through, I've got to ride through. I'm on a bike I feel comfortable on. I'm a rookie. I'm going to go for it. If I crash, I crash, but I'm going. And then you've got Morbidelli, the flip side, more experience, whatever. But I said after Silverstone, I hope we see this excited, racy Frankie come out and play more often. And he certainly did. I was impressed because once he got past, I thought, oh God, you know, Frankie made. And that happy Frankie that I saw in that Sunday debrief that smiled at me and went, that was so much fun. He had missed out on the podium by 0.00 whatever of a second to Mark, but he wasn't sitting there sulking. He was sitting there going, no, that was fun. And I saw that come out again in Frankie this weekend in that battle with Furman. He didn't come in afterwards and saying that bloody rookie was, you know, he came out again and said that it was good racing. So again, the Frankie, I've always been touch and go with Frankie. I've said many times before, he's a rider that just can go missing and you forget he's there, and didn't really look like he had hunger. But certainly that VR46 camp and being in that VR46 team with Rossi and that influence of being in that team has sparked Frankie. You know, I know Ollie Motor's a big fan, and he said, watch Frankie this year. Still wasn't completely convinced. I'm still not massively convinced, but I'm certainly a lot more convinced than I've ever been about the Frankie exercise from the past two races. And again, like someone commented earlier with Furman Aldeguer, didn't see these kind of performances coming this early on. It seems like we've had 20 rounds of MotoGP.
Yeah, it does.
Crazy. We've only had 7. We've still got
8,
so many left, you know, but I was impressed with that battle, and I was actually really impressed with both those riders.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a fantastic battle. Furman Aldeguer showing a lot of maturity. He's mixing it up. He's not scared to mix it up, but he's also not doing anything stupid. You know, he's taking gaps that are, some of them are a little bit tight, but they're certainly there. He hasn't been called into the steward's office. Simon hasn't had to give him the one-finger lecture. So he's doing a great job. Frankie has raced last weekend with Mark, this weekend with Furman. His racecraft is fantastic. Yeah, he seems to allow them to catch up, but once they're on his pace, he's a very wily guy. He knows exactly which corners to close the exit of the corner, and like that turn onto the long straight, he knew exactly how to drift Furman a little bit wide, gave him the drive, and I mean, straight away he put, 4 or 5 bike lengths into him. Frankie has impressed me this year, as has Jack Miller, who's disappointed me a little bit this year. He's my favorite besides the Ocon, the number 93 Ducati, the Gian Antonio. I must be quite honest. I've been, and he got injured. He broke his collarbone. I just haven't seen the Gian Antonio that you've mentioned, where he won in Qatar, and he said he came second in that sprint, then he won on the Sunday. He said, I'm only here to win. I haven't quite seen that Fabio back this year. Is it because, once again, like we've discussed, at the end of last year, he achieved his dream. He got a factory bike in a good team where he nearly had no ride. And now he's like, well, I'll do the best I can, but this is it. The spark to me isn't what it was last year. And you know me, I've said for the last 2 seasons, watch this kid. Frankie's outdone him in every aspect this year. And I watched between the two of them, and I'm like, come on, catch Frankie. He certainly isn't putting himself out there, and he could be a rider who's on the chopping block at the end of the year.
You know, Paul, 2 things quickly to end off on Furman. Some of his comments, he got the sprint podium, well deserved. I was really impressed with him, and I said I was impressed with how he spoke at Silverstone as well in the debriefs for a rookie. I was impressed with his comments after the sprint on Saturday, saying in the morning and over the Friday, he could feel that everyone was telling him to go with the soft, and the team doesn't always want to listen to a rookie. But I just felt something with a medium rear tire. I just felt that with the temperature in him, it would be better. Put it on, and it was the right tire at the end of the day to choose, and I put him on the podium. I was impressed with that, and I liked how he commented, like, the team doesn't always want to listen to the rookie, and especially Michelin telling him probably, everyone's going the soft, go the soft. Marquez, going, that's a soft, go with the soft. So for Furman to have that confidence and the feeling to say, "Oh, rookie, I'm going to go with a medium, thanks," and pull it off, that's, kudos to him as well. On the DJ Antonio, I have a couple of comments on that. First of all, is a full factory Ducati rider. And again, I think that comes with added pressure. Morbidelli was on it, with Pramac and that as well. Morbidelli, I don't think, is on a full factory Ducati.
No, he's on a VR46 contract.
Yeah. I think there's that pressure. Again, there is pressure that comes with a full factory contract. No matter how you look at it, you're a full factory. There's more expectation. There's more Ducati guys sitting around you wanting more info, whereas Morbidelli's enjoying his race, going, you've had a race, you've got Ducati on you now wanting info. We talk about Marquez and how good he is, and that what makes the great, and DJ Antonio and Zarco and all these guys are great. They're fast, they're ridiculous, they're great. But what makes the greater, or however you want to say it, is doing it week in, week out. And that's where you've got to give kudos to Alex Marquez. I've never really thought of him as one of the top guys. You have to with us here, because he's doing it week in, week out. I'm starting to not be surprised. Well, I'm not surprised anymore by Alex Marquez being there.
Yeah.
That's put him, he's got to do it more than just a season. You think how many seasons Mark's done it. Valentino Rossi did it. Jorge Lorenzo did it. Casey Stoner did it. That's what made them aliens. That's the alien status. So Digi and them have had brilliant performances. They've won races. They've proven their worth in MotoGP. Great. But what makes you greater is doing it week in, week out. And I think riders like Zarco, Digi, Morbidelli, those kind of guys will struggle to be on that pedestal because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's, there's not even an argument there. We've said it how many times? And what is it? Is it a natural ability to just buckle down? And it's not just, you look at any sport, any individual sport, look at the top people. So take tennis, for example. I'm just mentioning that because we watched the tennis this weekend. You get a guy like this Alcaraz. He's a youngster. He's going to be great for 10 years. He plays against the same opponents almost every week. Why is he that much better? Because the big match temperament, when the chips are down, these guys, whoever they are, so I use individual sports, because football, you can be the Cristiano Ronaldo of the team, but if your keeper keeps letting goals in, there's nothing you can do about it. Where individual sports, which MotoGP is, you as the rider need to perform Friday to Sunday, 22 weekends, every single weekend, not like the Mavericks, Zarcos. And as we say, Rob, on their day, they're faster than Marquez because they beat him. They're faster than Pecco Bagnaia. But then Pecco and Mark and Alex are picking up second, thirds, and fourths. On Maverick and Zarco's off weekends, if they finish, they're 12th, 13th. So that's the difference. I don't know. I wish we had a sports psychologist who tuned in here who could say, listen, this is what they need to do, because that's all it is. It's mental. Speed-wise, on their day, they're all equal.
I think of it, and this is a very vague and probably unprofessional kind of summary of it all. If I look at it, I always go back to like myself and Sheridan when we were teammates. Sheridan just worked harder at it. I worked hard, but he just worked harder. He just lived it more. He analyzed the data. He worked closer with his dad. He wanted to understand the technical side. He understood the rule book, kind of in a way like Mark. He just knew every single angle. But on the other side, if I look at like Rossi, Marquez, if they've got to be a duos and not be a gentleman to get the job done, they will. Doesn't mean it's who they are or whatever, but they'll do it. Rossi will shove it on the inside of Stoner and force him wide, so be it. If I've got to bump Gibana off, so be it. Marquez, if I've got to Mura the so be it. I think the Peccos and the Brads and the Zarcos and those guys, it doesn't come as naturally to them to be the duos or the bad guy, for those who don't know what duos is. For our overseas guy, you know what I mean? To be the bad guy.
Yeah.
And I've always said, I've seen the Aragon side of the Chezes and other guys. To be at that level, you have to be a certain amount of duos, bad guy. You do. And some are more than others. And I think that is because with that comes that relentless, I'm going to win. Nothing's going, like Tardozzi said to Pecco last year, Pecco, for God's sake, you are too much of a gentleman. You are going to lose this championship because you're too much of a gentleman. That's exactly what happened. Mark, a Rossi, a Stoner, a Lorenzo in that situation would not have lost that world title because they would have been the doers. I will be the bad guy too. And you can see after the race, like Rossi and Marquez want to go shake hands with Gibana and these guys that they've just been a doers to, because it's like, hey, it's racing, it's over now. It happened in that situation. It was like, I don't care. Now it's over. And you're like, you got over that very quickly. You prick. You just almost severed my arm off. And that's the difference. I didn't come naturally for me to be the bad guy or do that thing. And if I look at my wins that I got in South Africa, they came when I was the bad guy because I'd been put in that frame of mind by someone doing something. I remember my Kyalami win on the Triumph where I won by 3 seconds in the Super Sport class ahead of Stephen Windall and all these guys. It was because I'd lost the podium in the first race to Dylan White because his transponder, he had put it on the front of his fairing where you weren't allowed it. So he had beat me by. So I went up to my dad, clerk of the course, and he was like, no, and I lost it. I banged the table and I lost it, and I still got a grid penalty. I got like a 3 grid penalty. And I was like, my own father, who wrote the rules anyway. But I was so mull. Then my nice guy mentality was gone. And something had switched, and I went and blitzed that race. I cannot tell you anything about that race other than I crossed the line and I was in first place. I'd zoned out. I'd gone. Marquez, the Chezes, the Valentinos, those top guys can do that with a switch. They can. I went to a mental psychologist, a head doctor, the once with Chez, and he put us on this get in the zone thing. And Chez got in the zone like however many seconds quicker than I did. He got into it like this, where I had to like really, stop thinking about what's for supper and what I'm going to have. What you focus now.
Just focus.
I just went like this, boom, boom. Chez just did it, and I think that's the difference. It's just being able to be that bad guy when you have to be. Switch into that mode, even if it's just for a split second for a corner, and do that and maintain it and move on with yourself. I would feel bad. It would hold on to me. I knocked that guy off. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Those guys move on, and it's that arrogance.
I think that's the difference, Rob. They can just put it out of their mind immediately. So move on. And like you say, straight after the race, want to go shake his hand and say, good race. When meantime, Sete Gibana's in the sands, as is Lorenzo. They forget it instantly. And the same when they do have a crash. As long as they know what happened, it's out of their mind immediately. They don't harp on it or get to that corner for the next 4 laps and they're like, hey, I have to be a little bit cautious. Those top guys, that switch is flicked and it's out of their brain. It's dealt with. Might be in a little box at the back. They'll deal with it after Sunday night. But from Friday till Sunday, that switch, they have that ability. And I think that any sportsman, top guy, has the ability to do that. When they need to, they are all consuming in what needs to be done right now. And we'll deal with the consequence or the aftermath later. Not now. Now we're here to do a job, and I'll do it come whatever it takes. And I think with all the penalties and the I'm going to say the fairness that's coming to MotoGP, where you can't just T-bone someone out the way because there will be consequences, and rightfully so, because we're running bikes at 350 k's an hour. I think that's tempered that mentality a little bit, but certainly when it needs to come in, those front guys, those top guys can just do it instantly with no regard. Done. And move on.
We took quickly to end off on Marc Marquez. They do a bicycle race at Le Mans. He wasn't on a GP24 Ducati then. They were all on 2-wheeled bicycles. And who won again? And I'm not saying the others are. Marc is just, he wants to win. Whether it's a bicycle race, a game of chess, and they all do. Just do it a bit more than others. Alex wants us to talk about Ironman TT. Alex, I'm not going to do it here. We've got a show with Greg Maloney, who was there for us, coming up soon, and a one-on-one with AJ Fenter. So we're going to climb straight into Ironman TT, but it was brilliant. So sad the senior TT got called off for the weather. I want to end off, Paul, now with this question that's posed to me, but I'm going to pose it to you, and I'm going to pose it to every single one that is still on our chat here. Where is it now? It was Michael Fullion as well. Here we go. And I've been thinking about it in the back of my mind since I saw it about 20 minutes ago.
Jeez.
Rob, give us your top 3 riders in terms of ability to develop a bike. Now, Paul,
And are we talking riders that are currently riding? So this crop of MotoGP riders.
I would say yes. I mean, we can.
Okay, so let's presume that.
Yeah, let's presume it's the current field right now. And Paul, 15 minutes ago, 18 minutes ago, as soon as I read that question, my mind went Marc Marquez. I went Marc Marquez, done. Then I went, but hang on. At Honda, he developed a bike for himself. He made a bike that he could ride fast on, and it's well documented. No one else could go fast on that bike. But so he made a bike with Santi. He was able to make a bike go fast for him. So he didn't really develop a good bike then. He developed a bike he could win on. He could also crash his brains out on.
Yeah.
Has he developed the Ducati more? I would say his input has been more valuable to Gigi, who can then translate that into a bike to develop it more. I think Mark is on the best bike, and he's just comfortable, knows how good the bike is, and he can manage things a lot better now. He doesn't have to necessarily develop it more. He can make it better with his input and data that then Gigi can make better and translate to the bike. So after I kind of thought about that, I went, Jesus, now I don't know if Mark is, does he develop a bike? You know what I mean? So if I had to give you my top 3, oh God, that is such a hard question right now. I would have to probably say, I would have to put Mark in my top 3. Whether he's first or third, I don't know. I'm going to say Brad Binder, and I know it's going to sound biased and loyal and whatever. I just think when KTM were going with the Brad direction, it was a better direction. I'm not saying the Pedro direction's wrong. Other factors have come in terms of not having development parts and money to develop parts and the right parts and whatever. But at one stage, KTM were progressing well, and it was when it was the Brad Binder direction. And backing that up for me is the 4th in the World Championship, the 5th and the 6th, the last 3 World Championships where he's been the best non-Ducati. And Aleix Espargaro, as Wayne Taylor's just touched upon here, I would say, because I think what he did with Aprilia and what he's doing for Honda now.
That was going to be my first. I was going to say Aleix, can we count him because he's not racing? So now I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball here. And going back to Honda, and I've read every bit of info that everyone else has seen saying, but Mark developed the bike to suit Mark. So who are you going to develop the bike for? You want me as Marc Marquez to develop a bike for a rookie, let's say Joan Mir, to jump on a bike who has 1% more talent than me and he starts beating me on my own bike? Don't be stupid. I'm going to develop a bike that I can win on and nobody else can win. That's their mindset. I'm not saying that's how they think. I think the best person for developing a bike in the modern MotoGP era is Gigi D'Alenia. Without a doubt. I know he's not a rider, but he's had the input from some of the best. Dovi, Martin, Pecco Bagnaia, and look at the bike he's created. But a rider needs to translate that into speed on the track. So I think Aleix Espargaro, as much as he's not my favorite person in the world in terms of MotoGP riders, he moved Aprilia up 3 notches, and Honda have moved up 3 notches this year, coincidentally with him. Next, I'm going to say Luca Marini, because exactly, I think the progress, as much as he's not the fastest guy there, the point you highlighted, he doesn't crash, he brings the bike back. So you get lots of race info, and that's what develops the bike. The test days are, they're not irrelevant, but they are, because everyone tests so many different things, and you never know what Brad tested versus Maverick so why was Maverick faster than Brad? Brad had 11 different fairings and 4 swing arms to test, for example. We don't know that. So I'm going to put those 2 as my top 2. I'm inclined to throw Fabio Quartararo in, but then I want to take him out.
Yeah.
Because the Yamaha has also improved, and he's the only one who's really at the forefront of their development. So is it him or is it Cal Crutchlow? I don't think so. Well, how much has Dovi ridden the bike? He's hardly ridden it. So, maybe Augusto Fernandez is doing a good job. But me personally, I'm going to say Aleix, Luca Marini, and then just because I don't think you can throw Mark in because he's just too good. I think I'm going to throw in Quartararo, because the Ducati doesn't seem to have progressed. Yes, it most certainly has. But then what about Alex? So I don't know. I'm going to go with Aleix Espargaro and Marini and Fabio Quartararo, because we've seen big strides from them.
Yeah, the argument is there with Mark. Is it a case that he's developed it to go faster, or is it just his natural talent on a really good bike making him go faster? So I agree with that. So Brian Ritchie says Brad, Mark, and Luca. Wayne Taylor says Aleix Espargaro, Jack Miller, and Mark Marquez. Robert Swart just throws a huge spanner in the works here, and he's actually completely right going with your sentiments with Gigi Dall'Igna. But maybe, I don't know if it was more Pecco or Martin or whoever, but well, just ask who developed the GP24. That's literally the best bike. So that's and that's right. Johnny Martin says Maverick Vinales, Brad, and Danny Pedrosa and Mir. Do you take Danny Pedrosa and them in? I don't know.
And do you take Maverick? And Johnny, I agree with you fully.
Yeah.
Maverick this year, but once again, Maverick's developing a bike that Maverick can go faster. It hasn't benefited Bastianini in any way. So that's so that's my point. I fully agree. If I'm the rider, I want to develop a bike that I can go fast on. I actually don't care if it doesn't suit the guys behind me, because that just means I can beat them easier. But what is the collective? Ducati, certainly. The collective is for everybody to improve. And I think Honda and Yamaha, everyone knows that philosophy. I think Honda are now putting it more into practice. Yamaha to a point. KTM, I still don't know if they're doing that. I still think we have too many opinions within KTM. That's why suddenly you see Maverick doing exceptionally well in terms of the testing. Brad, not so much. So we all know on Tuesday, on Monday's test, Brad said he tested so many different things. I'd like to know if Maverick had the same things to test, or did he stick to 3 or 4 things? So anyway, but nice. That was a fantastic question.
I think there's a lot of factors you got to take in. At one stage, Ducati had 8 bikes. Yeah. So was it necessarily one particular rider doing it, or like you said, Gigi taking all this information and creating this GP24, which I think is more the case. While I do also lean to Brad, and a couple of people have, is also again, I say at one stage KTM had kind of said, right, we're going this direction, and it was working. It worked in a couple of different areas. They seemed focused on that. They then switched it to Pedro. Pedro's got a very unique riding style, very much like Mark on the Honda. I don't think what a bike he would develop would translate to a Brad and that. And exactly what you said now, Vinales, at the debrief at Silverstone, Brad was asked the question again, Brad, Maverick says you've got to be smooth. And then at one stage, Brad just went, you know what, I'm tired of hearing that. I'm going to go back to riding this bike the way I want to ride this bike. Sideways, hard. I've tried riding this thing slow, and it's just not, calm and the Maverick way, and I can't do it. So again, that leads itself towards, Maverick's building a bike that he can ride. Luca, I don't think I'm giving enough credit to, even though I've spoken about how much credit. I didn't put him in my top 3, but I think I really should, because I think he's an unsung hero in the development that Honda's done. Hasn't had the results, but certainly from last year, where by this stage he hadn't even got 1 point, didn't even come close to getting a point. Having a look at the championship there now, because of your suggestion, I was like, whoa, hang on a moment. This guy's, ahead of Bastianini, Brad, Mir, Quartararo. This guy's like really on it. So I think Luca is a really good shot. Jack, Brad, Luca here from Grunding Home. I think that's a good shot. Danny Pedrosa, I don't know if I want to really put, I don't know how full time he is now. I'm talking more.
I would like to know if Mark Lloyd could answer this question, and maybe he can answer it to you in a personal way somehow. With us seeing on Monday's test, KTM running a Ducati-esque front fairing, who makes that decision? And I understand they're looking at Ducati, it's the winning bike. Honda changed their front fairing to look very similar. Aprilia's not too far off. Who made that decision? Is it collectively the riders, or does someone in their aero department, whatever they call it, say, listen, why don't we go with this shape? That's something to me that would give us an indication of how much input is rider based, to say, okay, guys, we've tried 50 different wings, 30 winglets, 12 of these. we need something else? Or is it someone in the factory who says, but look what the Ducati looks like. We look nothing like that. Let's try there. Just as a for interest thing to see if anyone would give us that kind of insider information.
You can certainly ask Mark if you're still tuned in. Otherwise, yeah, we can certainly. I'm sure that question has been asked. Whether KTM want to answer that question, we don't know. But I mean, it's blatantly obvious. Someone in the PR department's got to address that sometime, because it's, as you said, it's blatantly obvious. It's a good comment there from Jean Creel. KTM, too many riders with different riding styles, and you can almost say, well, then how did Ducati get it right? I think what Ducati got right was Ducati somehow made a bike that multiple styles could just feel comfortable on, and then adapt themselves to the bike, and then that information translated to Gigi, and then he just made it even better. Because the biggest argument, if you look at most riders now, the biggest mindset that they've got to do is, like Martin on the Aprilia, if he had more time, you can't sit on that bike and try and make it a Ducati. KTM have tried to make their bike a Ducati by hiring those exact engineers. Gigi Dell'Igna's right man, who's got his playbook. KTM forked out millions. And that's still where they are. So it's making sense of all that data. First of all, I think, as you said, Gigi Dell'Igna, if you really had to answer that question, you'd have to say Gigi Dell'Igna, because he's able to take it and put it to good use better than anyone else. And this is where KTM have got this problem now. It's great that you've got these 4 riders, but how is a Bastianini, Enea Bastianini? How is this guy just not competing anymore? How is Brad fallen off a cliff and trying to find his confidence again? Pedro is starting to make sense of this now, and it was a brilliant ride. I know Mark got rider of the weekend, that new rider of the weekend thing, which I agree with, but I thought the whole point of the rider of the weekend was to give it to someone that didn't win. So for me, it would have gone to Pedro Acosta all day long. Andre Calvert, put all riders on a GP24, and what is the finish order? There's another question. And last week I was looking at putting a post on Facebook, or my brother was looking at putting a post on Facebook saying, what is everyone's ideal wish list MotoGP grid? Right, if you could have the wish list grid of who goes where now, which riders stay and which riders go. I think a lot of people, I would certainly add Toprak in. Like you said, a Miller and a Rins would probably go out. A Manu Gonzalez maybe in, maybe a Bulliga in, maybe a David Alonso in already, But I suppose Andre Calvert, as you said there, put all the riders on GP24s, and what finish order do you have? My simple answer to that would still be Mark probably winning. I think, Alex has proven his worth on it. Pecco has proven his worth on it, but I think the biggest benefactors on GP24s out of the current crop would be Brad and Fabio Quartararo for me.
100%. That's exactly who I would. And possibly Maverick. He's highlighted this year that he is super special. The fact that we don't see it very often can be a downside to Maverick Vinales, but I think this year he's certainly, I was one who said this oak's going to do nothing. And he's been the highlight for KTM, realistically speaking. So I've straight away, when that question was asked, the way you put it, Brad Binder, Fabio Quartararo, and I think Maverick Vinales. I think those 3 would really be in the mix every single week. I still believe you'd have Mark first, Alex and Pecco, purely because if the change was to happen now from the next race, they've got experience on the bike. If it was a case that no one had ever ridden one before, it was brand new, the best bike, and everyone was getting this new toy, Mark would still be first, but then I think we might see a different scenario. But because of riders who've been on the bike, Alex and Pecco have got an advantage. Thereafter, I think Brad, Maverick, and Quartararo would be there. And because of Brad's consistency last year and years before, he'd probably be the 3rd best or 2nd best rider consistently. Maverick just shows, even when everything goes his own way, he can have weekends where he falls off and just doesn't pitch up. So, but that would be very, if only kind of scenario.
And Pedro Acosta is another rider, me and you.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Pedro would, without a doubt, if you look at what Firmin Aldeguer has done in 7 or 8 races,
Andre Calvert, I reckon Fabio smokes Mark on the same bike. Andre, I don't agree with you, but that's a great way to end the show. Thank you. I'm tired of answering all these really good questions now, to be honest. My brain's fried. It's 10 o'clock your side, and it's 11 o'clock your side.
No, 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock.
Yeah, it's only 1 hour. I'm 9 o'clock, and I've got to be up at 3 a.m. to drive to Kent. So we're going to leave it there. It's been a brilliant show, Paul. Thank you so much. Everyone in the comments just absolutely love it. The interaction, the questions, the answering the questions, the everything. It's this is why we do it. It's absolutely.
Listen, I know we always discuss the racing, and that's what the show's all about. But maybe we're going to have a show where we take 5 questions, because this has been 15 minutes on one, and we say, okay, let's have 5 sort of abstract questions, things you wouldn't think about, and let's pull them apart, because yes, it's fun. That's a load of BS, because it's never going to happen. But it's that's how we think. That's what we're involved in this. We don't just want to say, oh, Mark won and this came second and that came third. That you can watch TV to get that.
That's the beauty of the show, is you've just got 100 heads are always better than one. That saying.
Yeah, sure.
It's all these different perspectives, and a lot of the times it's I didn't think of that. So I agree with you. It's brilliant. So let's keep it going. Let's keep it interactive, and it's brilliant. So big thank you to each and every one of you. Stay tuned. As I said, we're going to have Greg Maloney when he eventually gets his way back to South Africa. He's had delayed flights and his bags went missing. Paul, you'll be happy to know they found his bags. So
thank heavens.
Mark Cap is on its way. And we'll have a one-on-one chat with AJ Fenter soon as well to talk everything TT. But from the MotoGP side, thank you so much, everyone. Mugello, can't wait for Mugello. It's going to be exciting. And Paul, we'll just wait for that show, and then we'll carry on with the brilliantness that is talking MotoGP.
Absolutely, Rob. Another fantastic show. Thanks to everyone who's stayed up and listened to us talk absolute rubbish like we always do. And we'll catch you in 2 weeks' time after what to me is the best GP on the calendar. I've been there. I've been to a few, but Mugello is absolutely special. So, look forward to it.
Goodbye.